And you've already seen what you came to see, so no hiding that. We can't have the moment where we open it up and let you see him, because you can't hide him behind anything. But we can talk about him. So we'll do that here. The Creator who is reality, Goliath against reality. I was talking to the children on the way here. One of the concerns I have for this kind of thing is that it's just interesting and it's neat. Anybody is interested in this to some degree. But that can be a danger because it's just interesting. So let me just start off right away with this. I'm really convinced, including myself, that we don't really grasp what God is communicating in that record of David fighting Goliath. It's not just this giant fell, giant died, little guy got the big guy. Because I think what we do is we tend to take it very lightly. And in our own life, we're facing the exact same battle and losing, or not doing well, and we're not seeing the connection. So just want to start off by talking about this. It wasn't a fight of size, because that's how we take it. It was just a size difference. But the real contest that day was a contest of whose wisdom is true and real. And Goliath was real. He wasn't this this thing that we've come up with, and this at least helps to depict that reality because it's based on history. But Goliath was real. But what did he carry with him in the full sense of his person? He carried with him everything that this world values, which is us. We value it. See, you and I have the world with us in our nature, in our old nature if you're born again. And so you valued, by nature, you value him, actually, by nature. Now, because we have the Bible, we laugh at him. But we might turn around and fully live according to his wisdom without even realizing what we're doing. See? That day, it wasn't that Goliath fell. It was the wisdom of our own heart that fell. The wisdom that what I think is wise was destroyed that day. Because if we just take God out of the equation and we put him in front of us, there he is. Who do you want on your side? Right? We're going to pick this guy. And he had the advantages. He had all the advantages, including experience. He's a very experienced warrior on top of his size. So he wasn't, like I say, he wasn't a bumbling warrior. He definitely wasn't a bumbling giant. He had a lot of experience, and that was what Saul brought out, right? He said, he's been a warrior since his youth, and you're still a youth. So he had experience. He had obviously the size. This is a powerful, powerful human being, because it would be hard to measure what a person like this could do, but we can take people smaller and extrapolate from that what a person like that could do. But at the same time, we have the record of Scripture has his weapons in it. And just from his weapons, we can tell an immense amount, which we'll get into here shortly, about his power. So he had a tremendous amount of power. He was bold. He was a courageous man. He's not a wimp. He wasn't just big, and the big bully, he goes and bullies the little people. He went out there. He went out in front of a whole army, and he just said, "Here I am. I'll take anybody you've got." That's a blank check. Here you go. That's a contest. You set the terms. I'll take whoever you've got. It's not a wimp, because we can make him out like that. He's almost just like this. He doesn't know what he's doing. He knew what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing, humanly speaking. And that's how we want to speak, because we're humans and we live by his wisdom. It's in us to do that. See? Okay, let's just take it and walk it into life. See, when I am trusting in myself to work out my problem, I have done the exact same thing he did right there. I have trusted in the wisdom that was killed, that fell down that day on the battlefield. I have trusted in that wisdom, and just like it didn't work for him, it's not going to work for me. See, it's very personal, but I'm afraid we miss that part of it. We keep it just a Bible story. And we're not going deeper into what really is there. This is life-changing. While David was unquestionably a warrior in his youth, he lacked that day what all the others had. Humanly speaking. But what he had that day, he put to the test. And that was he had God's wisdom. That's what he had. He went to fight with non-human wisdom. And it worked. It worked. No one thought it would work. His brothers scoffed at him when he pulled out non-human wisdom. You know what they're going to do to us? Pull out non-human wisdom, and humans, even the believers next door to us, so to speak, will say, what? That's not wise. Well, what are we going to do? Let go of it? As Isaac Watts in his book on logic said, to this effect, he said, many men in right positions have been moved from that position by basically the laugh of an ignorant buffoon. You know, we can give up the truth because other people don't think it's true or wise. We're starting to see something here with David, because not only was he willing to go out there so confidently, not in himself, but in a wisdom that is not of this world. He was so confident to go out there, but he did it in the face of adversity from his own people who should have been supporting him. Now, whether we have time, whether we get into this or not, we can do it right now. But what blessed David that day, I'll say the blessing of the Lord that rested upon him, was the blessing that comes from God to a pure heart. And see, that's what David had right. He didn't have everything that everybody else had that day. There were thousands and thousands of warriors out there on that field. We're going to see a picture of it here in a little bit. But David didn't have what all those others had, including his brothers who were older than him and had every advantage over him of age and experience that comes with that. They were the soldiers, the three of them, older brothers that were there. They were the soldiers. They were the trained ones. They were the equipped ones. They were the official ones. They had all the advantage. But David had one thing that they did not have, not one other person apparently. I put a caveat there, but we understand that generally not one other person had on that field that day. That was a pure heart. That was what David went to fight with, was a pure heart. And that's what Goliath could not beat. He couldn't beat a pure heart. And I was meditating on this, and this has always struck me, at least for years, that when David got there and he saw the problem, and then he basically begins to express his zeal there, and his older brother just jumps on him and begins to correct him and belittle him. And he said, I know the naughtiness of your heart. And here's David, possibly the only one on that battlefield who didn't have a naughty heart. And he was the one who's blamed for having a naughty heart. Isn't that something? But here's what's remarkable to me. The evidence that David didn't have that kind of heart is what? In his response to his older brother. What did he say? He didn't put him in his place, did he? How easy would that be, brothers? Right? He didn't put him in his place. He didn't retort. He didn't give some sarcastic remark. What came out? Purity. That was pure. That was just gold there. You see why God loved David? No other reason than he'll love anyone. He's looking at our heart. Now, if we back up a little bit before that, we find Samuel going to anoint a new king, and I was catching this, God did not tell Samuel who he was going to be anointing. If you read it carefully, he just says, go and anoint who I will tell you. And he goes, and they're having a sacrifice, and he calls Jesse's family to the sacrifice. And Jesse comes, but he doesn't bring his youngest son, David, to the sacrifice. And they're at the sacrifice, and it seems from the account, it's at the sacrifice that they are presented to him one at a time, the brothers, and Samuel thinks it's certainly this one, and it's not. So God lets him go through this. It's all for us, obviously. He lets him go through every one of them. And then he makes this statement that just stands in all of history. For God sees not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but God looketh on the heart. Now, we're going to get into the building of this statue just for a very brief moment to give a little background. And then we're going to get into the history of really understanding Goliath a little better historically. So we have actual pictures of the Philistines from this time period. And this is a picture taken by, I'm going to use our modern terminology, but taken by the Egyptians. And so you can see where we got the hat from, because we have many depictions of this hat from the Philistines. This is a very distinct Philistine hat right here, helmet. And in those would be some kind of feather or something coming off the top. It's hard to tell, but a headdress there on the helmet. So this isn't just guesswork, but this is what they looked like. And we're assuming that Goliath wore the traditional helmet of a Philistine. Now, these are Philistines that have been captured by the Egyptians, and they made a depiction of that. So they've been stripped of their armor, and they would dislocate their shoulders and then tie their arms above their head so that they couldn't do much. And then, now, and this is another depiction, and here we have the sword, and we talked about this last time, depicting his sword, and I researched the Philistine swords, and we could make a replica of a Philistine sword to dimension here, but what would be the problem with that? Well, I realized as I was studying it, it wouldn't matter, because David said about his sword what? There's none like it. So we can study all we want in archaeology, but there's none like that one, so it's going to be unique. And so we can just take our guess on what that sword looked like, but we could make one to scale at least. Now, we took these historical things to make him, and I'm sure it could be refined some. I won't go through all of this, but just mention this plates, because I'm not going to mention this later. But this is plate armor, and there are different kinds of armor that they had. In the ancient world, the Philistines had it, different types of armor. One of the most common was a ribbed armor, like a lobster type armor. One plate would overlap another. But they also found these, and they found these in Gath, okay? Meaning this armor right here, they found in Gath. And for another reason we're going to get to, that's the type of armor we used here. These small plates that would be woven together and form that upper protection. The statue took 1 year to 3D print, multiple 3D printers, and multiple people printing, and multiple problems, lots of problems, because not only was it our first time to print something this big, but it was spiritual. There's no question about it, spiritual. And that's the case. We understand that when we set out on these things. Anything like this we set out on. We were talking about that before the thing started. There's with different people that are here today that have faced that even to get here. But the size of the cubit, okay, so you can see that this is not the 9-foot traditional Goliath, 9 foot 7 inches or so. And that's what I heard all my life. I remember a teacher when we were in college, he came into chapel and he had taken a pole and he printed a big head and he held it up to the size Goliath would be, and he preached on Goliath. And that was a 9-foot Goliath. It's impressive. But this is 11 foot. So how do we get from that to here? And what's the background to that? So the size of the cubit is what it depends on. We know exactly how tall Goliath was, see? But how big is a cubit? That's the whole question. We know how many cubits, but we don't know how many feet a cubit was. At least that's what we have to figure. So here's what we have to go by. Now, this is just a very brief introduction to this. There's a lot more to this study, to the study of the cubit, but we have concrete things that they gave us the measurement for that we can go measure, right? So we know how big a cubit is. We're not guessing about this because they told us how long it is. We go measure it. We convert that to feet and we say, okay, a cubit is this long. Well, one of those is Hezekiah's tunnel. And when the Assyrians were coming down, and if you don't know a lot about that, you need to study that. Okay, that's all I'll say. You need to study that everything about that, everything, and become very educated about that. But Hezekiah saw that the Assyrians were coming, and they were devastating every city that they came across in the whole world. They were undefeated. They had never been defeated by any city that they came across. One after another, hundreds of cities across the world were just falling to this, and they're coming your way. What are you going to do? They started preparing, and they dug. They didn't want the Assyrians to find water, so they dug this channel underneath Jerusalem to bring the Gihon springs into the city and to close it off from the Assyrians. And they closed up all the fountains all around the land, just all over the place, all the fountains coming out. They blocked them off so the Assyrians wouldn't find water. Now, with this tunnel, though, they found a plaque on the wall at the lower end, at the entrance point down here. They found a plaque that was put up by the diggers, actually. It's from their perspective. And it's in ancient Hebrew from the time of Isaiah. And it talks about them digging the tunnel, which is mentioned in Scripture. Okay, so we have both of these things. And in it, they give the measurements for the tunnel. So there you go. We just measure the tunnel, and it's 1,200 cubits. So let's get to that. 1,200 cubits, approximately 1,750 feet long. So the Solomon inscription cubit is approximately 17.32 inches. And the cubit is the measurement from the elbow to the tip of the finger. So there's your cubit right there. And don't think that's odd or ancient, to name a measurement by a body part. What do we measure by? Feet. Yeah, exactly. So, okay, now this is the source of Goliath's traditional height of 9 foot 7 inches or so. This is called the short cubit, and there's some variation in it and such, but it's about 18 inches. We'll just say 17.5, 18 inches long. But there were 2 cubits used in the ancient world, and those are mentioned in Scripture. One is called the cubit of a man in Deuteronomy 3:11, but about 15 to 18 inches, different eras of history and so forth. But you have the shorter cubit, and then you have the longer cubit mentioned in 2 Chronicles 3:3, the length by cubits after the first measure. It's called the first cubit. And that one is approximately 20.5 to 21.5 cubits. So if you compare these two, that's the comparison that you're talking about. So the long cubit is quite a bit longer than the short cubit. And both were used. Both of these cubits were used in Israel, no question about that. What would lead us to conclude that he would be 11 feet? Well, 2 things I'll give you right away is his armor. His armor. That man was massive because of what we're going to learn about his armor, okay? That man was gigantic. And 11-foot man fits his armor better than a 9-foot man. Okay, that's one. Number 2 is, there's an archaeologist who has been researching the measurements all across Israel for some years. And this is what he's been doing. He's been measuring all these structures. And his conclusion is the main cubit used was the long cubit. And that cubit was definitely used in Gath, actually, the long cubit. And so, and that era of history, when you go back to, we're talking about Goliath right around 1000 BC. For that era, it seems that that was the ruling cubit at the time, the long cubit. So that's why we actually use the long cubit for him. So average Israelite somewhere around 5'7". And it really puts things in perspective. Here's the tallest man recorded. Robert Wadlow was 8'11". There's his dad next to him. And it didn't take him long to outgrow his dad. If we put Robert Wadlow next to Goliath, well, Robert Wadlow had giganticism that, of course, made him grow very tall, but he's also skinny and slender and delicate. And his bones were delicate. His forehead was very thin. So he wasn't a giant in the historic sense. See, he was tall. There's a difference. See, because a true giant is someone who is actually fully gigantic proportionally gigantic. So his bones are gigantic. Everything is proportional. See, Goliath was a giant. Robert Wadlow was tall. So the ark encounter, they used the long cubit right down here to build the ark. Now, Goliath's armor. So he had a helmet of brass upon his head. He was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight, and we think mail, we're thinking chainmail here, but don't necessarily think that way. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. So we have to get that. Now, I haven't gotten to the bottom of this personally. There's different numbers and things, but it's approximately 125 to 150 pounds. Those shekels of brass for his coat. That's just more research coming to nail down. So I put the low number, 125 pounds. That's 2 bags of concrete, 60-pound bags of concrete. Could be more than that. I've read a lot of this online. People will say, well, our soldiers go into battle with 200-pound packs on. This is hand-to-hand combat, so it's a little different, right? He isn't just packing this stuff to the battlefield and taking it off and fighting, which is what our soldiers hope to do. When they get to the battlefield, they're not want to carry 200 pounds around. But so this is hand-to-hand combat. He's wearing this 125, 150 pounds, and that's only his upper armor here. There's no other equipment we're talking about. He had a bit more equipment there. Now, this is traditional chainmail, but this, as you notice, has a long dress down here, and then it also covers all the way down the arms and has gloves on it, and it has a hood. So this is more than than he would have had, and this weighs right about 30 pounds. Okay, so 30 pounds, and it's a lot of extra armor there. The spear, Goliath, and I put the word powerful, useless spear. The staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. How much could one mighty man with a spear do? Well, we have a historical example of that in David's mighty men. 2 Samuel 23:8, exact same time in history. These be the names of the mighty men whom David had, the Tachmonite that sat in the seat, chief among the captains. The same was Adino the Eznite, who he lift up his spear, and you see that's in italics because that is actually in a parallel account, so they put it in here for understanding. He lift up his spear against 800, whom he slew at one time. So one man with one spear slew 800. I have an amazing video on a spear instructor, and he's talking about how one spearman could fight 2 swordsmen.
Low, you could go above the shield and below the shield in the blink of an eye, which takes longer to do with a sword. The usual balance is a spear person can beat 2 swords people if there's no armor and no shields involved. A spear is a game changer.
But one man slew 800. Now, what could he do? See what I'm saying? So what could he do? What could he do to that Israelite army? It says God gave us this record that it was like a weaver's beam. Now, most of us aren't around this, but back then, this was just basically a standard measurement. It was so well known. So we can go back in history and find out what a weaver's beam looked like. This is from the weaver's beam of a Viking loom. And you can see the size there. Let's go to this next one here. Look at the size of that weaver's beam. Now, these are short, okay? He's not talking about the length of it here. Obviously, he didn't have this short little stubby spear. The girth of this spear, we're talking about something, this is a little log. Weaver's beam there. The most up-to-date loom of our modern mills differs from the above only in the devices for accelerating the process. So it's the same technology. We see this here in this Bedouin woman, and you can see the beam here going across there. Very, very common, standard thing. And that's what when they looked at his spear, that's what they all thought. That's just like a weaver's beam. We could go put that in our mother's loom back home. Okay, so it really tells us the size here. So we're thinking something like 3 inches thick here. Now, if you look at his fist there, it's actually designed to hold a spear, and that's 3 inches. You can go buy one of these. Okay, so as we get into his spear head, in Scripture, God gives us it's one of those that he actually gives us the weight for. So he tells us how heavy his spearhead weighed, not how big it was. We have to know what normal is before we can know what abnormal is. So what I'm going to start with is what a normal spearhead looks like. So I'll pass some of these around. Well, the replicas. I'll keep the real ones up here. But I should have opened this earlier. But this is an original Greek spearhead from around the time of Alexander. So around 300 BC. Okay, so that's large. Okay, that's the large end of spears here. And I've looked at lots and lots of spears over these recent years. That's a big spear. Okay, now this one here is a Roman spearhead from the 1st century. And this is a normal-sized spearhead right there. Because what's the point of the spearhead? Why do you not want a lot of weight on the end there? What's that?
Balance.
Balance. And then what would be the... That's fine. If a very skilled enemy is coming at you, what's he going to do if you're trying to thrust at him? He's going to be dodging too, right? So what are you going to have to do? Yeah, exactly. You got to be able to move that very, very fast. So if you have a bunch of weight on the end of your spear and you're trying to turn that around or up or whatever it is, it's not going to work. So the Romans didn't want big, heavy spearheads. They weren't trying to batter down your front door. They're just trying to go through you. And that's very effective at that. So you have two normal, on the spectrum here, spearheads. We can look at some pictures in history of this. Here's the Assyrians, and you can see their spearheads with a fist right there, and it's right between these two spearheads, the size of this one. Very normal. This is Roman here, and you can see their spears are very... Look at this one over here on it's your left. Went the other way, but you can see they're just coming to a point, because that's the point. No pun intended. But and then you can see this would be a Persian spearman there, and this is what you find over and over and over in history. This is another Persian. Esther's husband is on that picture. He's the second one. So this would be his father, and this would be Xerxes. But look at the spearman. Now, I love this picture because this is Ahasuerus. This is his father. Well, he became king next, right? Look at what is his father holding in his hand? The scepter. What happened to that scepter after he died? It got passed down. And what did the next guy do with it? That's probably a real picture of the real scepter that Xerxes or Ahasuerus used to give Esther's life back to her. You see why studying these things is just amazing. But we come to Kfar Monash. It's in Moshav. So this is a village in Israel. Well, while they were plowing their ground, a farmer, and he hit metal. Metal came up out of the ground, and when he looked, it was a hoard of weapons, ancient weapons. And among them were these spearheads and many other things, axe heads and so forth. But the thing about these spearheads is they're gigantic. They're tremendous. They're extremely large. And that largest one there, I have a replica of it here. So this is what we're looking at. So they pulled this out of the ground. Now, you can see on the replica, I'll hand this down around a little bit. As you can see on the original, it has battle marks on it. There's no question this has been used before whoever it was that put that in the ground. And here, I'll just pass these around if anyone wants to look at them. But that spearhead is a spearhead of a giant in Israel. Now, there were no giants, so what do secular archaeologists do with that? Now, what do you do when you pull out a giant spearhead from the ground, where in the Bible says there were giants in the land? You pull a spearhead out, and there aren't any giants. What are you going to do with that? So, we've been to, a number of us have been to Israel, and I went to the museum in Israel where they have these on display a number of times, saw them and walked right on past them, because this is what they do with everything over there. They don't tell you what you're actually looking at, the value of it. It's just sitting there. And so you don't know that's a giant spearhead. It just looks like there's weapons all over the place in these museums. So you see one, you see another, you see another. After a while, it's just another one. And you don't realize this is remarkable. This is a giant spearhead. And so they've tried to write it off this way or that, but they can't. A couple ladies, they tried to say that, well, what it is it was decorative. And yes, somebody took those decorations down and tried to use them, but they said that they were used in to hold up the tent. Like this, like here, we see this king, and you see his tent poles are two spears apparently, right? And they said, just like that, these giant spearheads. These are giant spearheads. These are regular spears. That's all these are. And I went ahead, because that's how they made it appear in the article, that we found these over here, and these are just like them. Here, I did a comparison. Okay, so if we take his head as the measurement, 8 to 10 inches human head, those spearheads are about the size of his head. So those spearheads are about 8 to 10 inches. Well, if we compare that to the Monash find, that's the difference there. So this is nothing nothing related. Okay, so all that said, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs and a target of brass between his shoulders. He had the greaves, which are this lower leg armor, and then he had a target of brass between his shoulders. But then just for a moment here, Goliath's frontal covering, his useless frontal covering, his shield. Now in Hebrew, there are multiple words for shield. The one that Goliath brought to the field that day, carried by his armor bearer, was a tsanah. It's a very particular shield. And this is not a tsanah, but it's close enough. I just got a picture up here. But a tsanah was a full body shield. And that's what he brought. Because that would be some immense shield. Obviously, he was very, very well protected. And this was being carried by his fighting companion, his assistant. And his assistant would have been a very formidable warrior himself. They didn't just pick anybody to carry the things, because they would also fight. So with all that, we come to the sling. Now, the sling was a weapon that just impresses me over and over every time I learn something new about it. And I want to just share a few things with you here tonight about the sling. It was definitely a real combat weapon. When you get back into ancient history, all of the major armies used slings very effectively, very extensively. Okay? It was a key part of their military, the slingers. Like we see with Israel, the Benjamites and so forth. Now, the Benjamites were left-handed slingers. And they could hit what? Because their accuracy is actually told in Scripture at a hair's breadth. Now, what's missing in the account is how far. They would not miss at a hair's breadth. In other words, they could hit a hair. Okay, but how far? And you know what they answer? You know why there's no distance given? Okay, yeah. What is it? Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's the answer. Until. So because they could hit any distance the rock could go. They could hit it. And the record is there in history for these kind of abilities. But so the Benjamites could literally hit anything within range, bullseye. Okay? Now, when we start learning what this could do, that's scary. Okay? Because the sling, well, it just threw us a rock, right? Well, here's a guy who doesn't know how to sling in modern times on YouTube doing a little test. So let's just see what a guy who doesn't know how to sling can do with a sling. So he hit, that's a helmet, a Roman helmet with a watermelon in it. And here's the results. Okay, now that would hurt. And he doesn't know how to sling. Okay, are you scared yet? What's that? I would be concerned. Because somebody who knew how to do that and did that from their childhood, like the Balearic slingers are very famous in history, but they, from their tiniest little ages, they were taught to sling, and they literally weren't allowed to eat until they could shoot something out of a tree. So it was a part of everything they did. And they were taken out to battle by the other armies of the world, you know. And so, okay, now this next one is a researcher who's researching the force of a sling stone on impact. Let's listen to his conclusion here. He's surprised himself at what he discovered.
I'm surprised, really surprised actually. I've heard that these things were very powerful. It's just difficult to contemplate that this bit of string and this bit of leather that I can roll up and pop in my pocket has effectively the penetrating power of a 9mm bullet.
9mm bullet. It went into his skull. So we don't need all the research, but whenever people look into it, they're always amazed. Like, how can, like you said, it's a string. You could make this out of grass. So you could be without any weapon, and you can manufacture yourself one real quickly, and you're formidable right there. See, you're ready to go right there. You got a 9mm pistol right there, and you got ammunition all over the place. It's just really a quite a weapon because of its malleable nature. You know, it can be just mold to the situation. Let's look a little more though. Here, now I hope this is a ballistic dummy, and so I hope he's not too graphic here for you, but he's not real. There's nothing real about this guy, all right? So that's not a real skull, but it is designed to replicate a real skull. So now we could see what another slinger, who also doesn't know what he's doing, could do with after about an hour of practice or something like that to a skull. Now he missed. Yeah, a doctor got on there and said, I think he would die from the trachea too, so yeah. All right, but then he got the head. Now, sorry, I'm again not trying to be real graphic, but that's it. So that's someone who doesn't know what they're doing. It literally split the skull, completely split that skull and broke it. So this is a watermelon, and now we could go on and on, just studying about the sling. And it's not that the sling gets the glory, but we're learning. It's not the sling doesn't get the glory. We are learning, though, the context of all this. And the sling, see, it was a weapon that could just mold to any combat situation, because that same sling could shoot a rock or a metal, let's say lead, that big, just like a bullet of ours, and they had bullet-shaped ammunition, let's just call it. And just like our bullets, it would level out and it would fly like a bullet. Well, but they could also shoot anything up to a pound. They could shoot a rock, we're talking about a rock about that big, a pound. So they have a lot of range of ammunition for different types of situations. Like the larger rocks were just devastating for armor. But then what they could do is they could also, unlike a gun very powerful, but it's very limited. But a sling, they can sling over walls. They can sling over their companions that are in front of them, the soldiers. So you can have all these levels of trajectories there. They could also, and this one really got me. Think of a stone flying at a horrible speed, just a scary speed. And this stone, I mean, they find these embedded in walls, fortification walls, embedded in the wall. And think of this stone, but these slingers had all kinds of skills. They could send that stone, and they would do this, slinging across the ground. It's skipping across the ground. And you got a shield, where's your shield? It better be everywhere. Because what's it going to do to your feet, right? Just quite a weapon. And you can see why they used it for so many thousands of years. So in conclusion, this is the battlefield. And this is a very well-defined battlefield by God's record. And you can see Soko up there on the left. That was a fortress. And so over here on the left is the fortress. And then you can see over here is Azekah. And Azekah was also a fortress. And these are guarding this valleyway, which is actually the borderland between Israel and the Philistines. So this was an invasion. The Philistines, you can see Gath in the distance there, 5 miles away. The Philistines have invaded, and they're stopping them at this key gateway. Now, later on, they would be successful and make it all the way up to Bethlehem. If you follow this valley, you'll get up to Bethlehem. Because you remember David's mighty men later had to break through to get to the well. So they did succeed later when David is on the run. He wasn't on the run this day. And he came down from Bethlehem to this side. He didn't want to go to that side because that was the Philistines. So the Philistines, and I wonder if I could do this. There you go. So the Philistines are along this ridge here. And the Israelites are along this ridge right here. And of course, we know what's going on in the middle there. It's a very large valley. And just share these couple things as we close here. But David, when he got there, he had to come up with this plan very quickly, instantaneously. He didn't have any preparation time to speak of. But what was the first thing he did? After he's called to Saul, what happened next? The armor, right. So Saul gives him his armor. What does David do with it at first? See, so he wasn't opposed to armor. Right? He wasn't like he said, no, I don't need that. But what did he really reject it? Because he says, I haven't, yeah.
Rejected all the earthly armor, and he used hands on him.
He actually did. He definitely did. At first, his first reason for putting it off was what, though? The first thought. What's that?
He hasn't tested it.
He hasn't tested it. He hasn't tried it. So it's that simple. Right? That's what he said. I haven't tried this. And that's very understandable in the sense that he really hadn't tried it. It's not a good time to try something for the first time, really. We can understand that. So he puts that up. But what's he going to do? Well, he had something he had tried. He had tested it. He had proven it. That was his sling. So he needed something. He's got to do something. He's not going to just go out there and blow on the man, right? He has to do something. And his trust is in the Lord, but there is some means he's going to use, right? There's some mechanism here. So he just uses the one that's at hand, and which is his sling. Now, don't forget, this is a real weapon. It's not a toy. And so he does have a weapon, and then he goes out to the brook, and that brook is right at the base of this hillside here. Now, today, it's obviously meandered over the centuries and millennia, 3,000 years, but this tree line here is the current brook right there. And so it's still there. And he picks up 5 stones, but my estimation is, I believe it was up again, closer to the hill back there. But he goes down and he picks up the 5 stones. Well, at that point, he's on the battlefield. Okay? And so from there he moves out, and as he moves out, then there's the engagement. And he has 5 stones. Now, that's like a pistol for us, because he could shoot those in rapid fire. 5 stones very quickly with a sling. You don't have to wind up a sling, because that's what we think. I always thought that. You wind it up and sling it. They could do that, but they did not have to do that. They could just whip that in one fluid motion, and it's done, and they're ready for the next one. Same while we're on it. Same with the bow and arrow. There is a man today who has replicated ancient methods for shooting bow and arrow, and he can do things you just couldn't imagine could be done, and he's not a warrior, okay? But he can jump, he could run and jump over this pulpit, and before he hits the ground on the other side, he could shoot 5 arrows accurately. Okay, this is modern times. And again, he doesn't have all the background that they had. So they would put arrows in their hands like this, and they would go 1, 2, 3. They could shoot it faster than you can think, okay? So it's a different world. We're not used to that world. And, but anyway, he has those 5 stones. But again, what is that? Really, what is that? He's a nobody. He has no armor on. He's going out there. This guy has every kind of armor you can think of, because that's literally what he did, right? He's going to protect everything he can efficiently. And David has nothing except that. He has that one thing. And when he goes out there, you remember what David said? But David makes this remarkable statement, because he says that all the world might know that there is a God in Israel, that all the world, wait a minute, and here we are talking about this. How did David know he was going to get past that battlefield? He had a sense from the Lord of the magnitude of what he was about to do. He had a sense of that. He was standing on that glorious foundation of the Lord's support, let's say, underneath of the everlasting arms. And he knew what was going to happen that day, and that God was going to get glory forever and ever, all around the world. And you can see that in his words there. He stands up in that confidence, and he calls out that he's going to kill him and take his head off that day in the name of the Lord. And that's what he came to him in the name of the Lord. That's what he came. That's the wisdom. And we're going to close with this, because the name in Hebrew, a name, is actually all that a person is. It's not just the reputation. It's all that a person is. So he's saying, I'm coming to you in the person of God. I'm coming to with who God is. That's what I'm fighting you with, who he is. And that's back to that first point we were talking about, the wisdom. See, it was about wisdom. Whose wisdom was he trusting in? The person of God, which is his wisdom. That's what he was leaning on. And God told all of us that day, and everyone else in the world, he said, here's my wisdom, and you can have it if you want it. Let's pray.